1 minute ago, Denzel Washington testifies, Diddy tried to escape Earth to host Freakoffs in space. The courtroom had heard a parade of celebrities, victims, and whispers from behind Hollywood's velvet curtain. But when the bailiff uttered his name, the oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. The prosecution calls Denzel Washington to the stand. No one moved, no one blinked. And then he walked in. No entourage, no stylist. Just a man dressed in a stark black suit, a navy tie, and a single folded sheet in his hand. The icon of American cinema, the man who had played warriors and kings, took his seat not to perform, but to speak. "I'm not here because I want to be," he began. "I'm here because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't come." What followed was a testimony so grounded in conviction, so surreal in its implications, that it shifted the entire weight of the trial. Until that moment, the case against Sean Diddy Combs had felt like a swirling net of abuses, parties, NDAs, whispers of trafficking surveillance. But Denzel Washington wasn't a whisper, he was thunder. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't dramatize. His calm delivery struck harder than any outburst ever could. "I saw things, I heard things, and I stayed silent." He talked about the fear that grips Hollywood, the unspoken code of silence that protects power at all costs. "I thought if I kept my head down, I'd be safe," he admitted. "That's how this industry works, but I can't do that anymore." And then came the shift. If you think this trial is wild, now wait until you hear what Diddy was planning next. The room leaned forward. This was no longer about what Diddy did at parties. This was about what he intended to do beyond Earth. Denzel described the early 2000s when Diddy's influence began bleeding out of music and into the film industry. "He had a way of walking into a room and making people feel like the rules didn't apply to him," he said. "At first it seemed harmless, bravado, showmanship, ego, until it wasn't." He recalled a dinner somewhere in the hills, a quiet moment between courses when Diddy leaned over and said, "You know how to stay on top. You stop playing Earth's game." "I thought he was being poetic," Denzel said. "Turns out he was being literal." Over the years, he heard more. Industry peers confided in him. "Diddy's throwing another one this weekend," they'd say, and then freeze unsure whether to laugh or warn him. The parties weren't just parties anymore. They were rituals. And Diddy wasn't talking about building a legacy. He was talking about building an ark. He said, "My empire will outlive gravity." And I started to believe he meant it. By 2020, Denzel was invited to what he thought was a high-level creative retreat in Nevada. But it wasn't just writers and directors, it was billionaires. Scientists, aerospace engineers, and Diddy. He pulled me aside and said, "I'm done with this world. Too many cameras, too many rules. I'm working on something bigger, something off-grid." Then he opened his laptop. What Denzel saw wasn't a script or a business plan. It was a rendering, a capsule, a luxury chamber designed for zero gravity. LED floors, velvet seating, soundproof walls. He called it the Heaven Lounge, Denzel said. He said it would be the first entertainment pod in orbit. The gallery gasped. But Denzel didn't blink. He wasn't joking. He wasn't dreaming. He was building. According to Denzel, the guest list was already in development. 10 men, all hand-picked, all bound by ironclad NDAs. He said, "They won't find us up there. No lawsuits, no cameras, just freedom." And then the phrase that chilled the courtroom. He said, "I'm about to host the first zero-gravity freak-off. They won't be able to touch me, not in orbit." The judge leaned forward. Reporters scribbled furiously. Diddy, seated across the room, stared at the floor. It wasn't madness, Denzel continued. It was a plan. The capsule wasn't a fantasy. It had backing, private investors, land in South America for the launch, a prototype designed by a lesser-known aerospace firm under the guise of a celestial arts platform. But the schematics didn't look artistic. They looked isolating, dehumanizing. There were no windows, Denzel testified, just artificial light. No views, just velvet walls and silence. It didn't look like a spaceship. It looked like a cage. The passengers weren't scientists or astronauts. According to Denzel, they were has-beens, fallen stars, scandals in suits. They all had something to hide, he said. And they thought they were buying escape. They weren't. They were signing up for exile. Denzel revealed that the mission was called Project Exodus. The capsule was designed for a 3-year orbit, no return, no oversight. He called it the no-return run, Denzel said. And the freak-offs wouldn't stop. They'd just levitate. He said, "It'll be like sin floating in the stars." For a moment, the room was silent, not because they didn't believe it, but because they did. The final blow of part 1 came in the form of a warning, a sentence Denzel recalled from a mutual friend. Diddy's not planning the next phase of his brand. He's planning the next planet. As the courtroom digested every word, every phrase etched into the silence, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't about a mogul losing control. It was about a man building a kingdom where control couldn't be touched. And it had almost worked. If the courtroom was stunned by Denzel's recounting of Diddy's galactic ambitions, they were about to be crushed by what came next. It wasn't theory. It wasn't hearsay. It was real. Because Project Exodus had nearly launched, Denzel resumed calmly. He wasn't just playing Mad King, he said. He was drawing blueprints, assigning seats. He had investors, real ones. The prosecution nodded, signaling to the monitor. Redacted names, offshore corporations, and coded communications filled the screen. These weren't party promoters, Denzel continued. These were billionaires, tech visionaries, private equity ghosts, aerospace intermediaries, the kind of people who only show up when markets crash or when satellites go up. The courtroom watched in disbelief as Denzel pointed to one name in particular, blacked out for public record, but confirmed to be a co-sponsor of a recent low-orbit payload test. The same firm had been approached by Diddy under the guise of launching a celestial culture capsule. But the branding was a front. The capsule was no more cultural than a padded cell. Denzel described the mock-up he had seen. Simulated in VR software, it was less spaceship and more nightclub. Tricked out with faux skylights, rhythmic LED pulsars, reclining chairs shaped like thrones, and audio isolation chambers. It was built for a performance, Denzel said, but not one anyone could walk away from. He emphasized that the space wasn't meant to be observed. There were no external cameras, no outward-facing ports, just a loop-light music control. You couldn't see the stars, he said. You'd forget they were even out there. The prosecution interjected. The simulation, later verified by federal agents, was stored on a secure server under the label Exodus Flight, Heaven Lounge Mode 7. One email simply read, "Once in orbit, all bets are off." The courtroom sat frozen. And then Denzel named the passenger list. Not publicly, but enough for the prosecution to nod. 10 men. One former NFL star. 2 ex-producers known for scandals that disappeared suspiciously fast. A social media influencer who had gone dark after a criminal probe. And one washed-up actor who'd vanished from the public eye after an unresolved harassment case. They all had something in common, Denzel said. They wanted to vanish without having to run. They thought this was a billionaire escape fantasy. But Diddy didn't want to leave, Earth, Denzel said. He wanted to float above it and watch it burn. And the plan was disturbingly close to completion. According to federal records introduced shortly after Denzel's testimony, a whistleblower from the aerospace firm came forward in late 2023. An engineer assigned to work on what he believed was a high-end tourism shuttle began noticing strange specifications. Insulated audio panels for a craft that wouldn't carry researchers. Soundproofing tech usually reserved for interrogation rooms. Mood lighting designed to mimic sedative twilight. And no re-entry plans filed. None. "You don't need blackout curtains for a science mission," the whistleblower reportedly said. He tipped off the feds. A surveillance operation began in January 2024. Federal investigators started tracking Diddy's movements. A private jet landed twice at an unofficial strip near Suriname, not far from a defunct Cold War-era launch facility. The area had recently been purchased under shell corporations. In February, a mock capsule was delivered to the site. Inside it, reclining seats, champagne storage, velvet rope decor, imported oils, and high-grade oxygen tanks. It was more Las Vegas than NASA. Then came the date. March 21st, Denzel said. He called it the reawakening. It was printed on the internal itinerary I saw. That's when the operation began. In silence, no sirens, no headlines, just precision. On March 18th, federal agents working with local law enforcement raided the Suriname compound. Diddy was inside, walking 2 passengers through the mock capsule. When arrested, he reportedly said, "You don't get to trap the future." But he wasn't just trying to escape. He was trying to erase everything he left behind. Weeks before the raid, he had legally transferred ownership of 3 U.S. properties to offshore trusts. NDAs were refreshed. Party invitees were asked to destroy all footage. Contractors were paid in cash. And his legal team had begun quietly dissolving his production entities. He didn't intend to come back, Denzel said flatly. Not ever. The prosecution introduced footage found during the raid. A rehearsal party, low-lighting music, champagne, masked guests. Diddy center stage laughing. They were practicing, Denzel whispered, practicing how to disappear. But even in orbit, some ghosts follow, because what Denzel revealed next shook the courtroom not with ambition, but with something far darker. Something rooted not in space, but in home. He lowered his voice. "I'm not here just because of what he did to grown men. I'm here because of what I saw him do to his children." Gasps. Diddy's jaw clenched. The judge signaled for calm, but the room was already spiraling. It was an afternoon in 2016, a mentorship event. An invite-only gathering for young black talent. Denzel was there as a speaker, Diddy as the host, but the estate felt off. He noticed one of Diddy's teenage sons, puffy eyes forced upstairs by security. Later, he passed a hallway and heard it, screaming, shattering glass. Diddy's voice roaring, "You'll learn discipline in this house or you'll disappear like the rest." Denzel froze, and it changed everything. He later approached the boy. "You good?" he asked. The boy whispered. "It's just how he shows love. It's normal." But Denzel knew it wasn't. He knew what he saw wasn't discipline. It was domination. And the court sat in horrified silence. Over the years, he said, I heard more. Assistants, tutors, party staff. They all told the same story. Diddy's children weren't just growing up in luxury, they were being used. At events, at meetings, at private gatherings. They weren't guests, they were props. Denzel paused. You raise a child in fear. Long enough, he said, they don't grow, they shrink. The courtroom couldn't look away. Not from the man who nearly fled Earth, not from the pain he left behind. Because the most terrifying part of Denzel's testimony wasn't the capsule or the billionaires or the escape route. It was that none of it would have stopped if someone hadn't spoken. As Denzel Washington stepped down from the witness stand, the courtroom was left shattered, not just by the scale of what Diddy had planned, but by the complicity that had allowed it to go on for years. This wasn't just about a man trying to escape justice. This was about a system built to ensure he never faced it in the first place. The prosecution began the next session by calling it what it was, a network of silence. A phrase used not just metaphorically, but literally referencing the physical, digital, and psychological mechanisms Diddy had constructed to erase truth before it surfaced. Denzel's words echoed through the gallery. There were cleanup crews, I saw them. He described the process in chilling detail. After Diddy's major events, especially those hosted at his Beverly Hills or Miami estates, a specialized team would arrive, not event staff, but fixers. They weren't cleaning up after a party, Denzel said. They were scrubbing reality. They brought with them equipment not typically found at after-parties, industrial-grade shredders, UV scanners, thermal vacuums. Their goal wasn't to tidy, it was to erase. No fingerprints, no photos, no memory cards left behind. The prosecution backed it up with footage surveillance captures showing black vans pulling up to the estate in the early morning hours after high-profile events, individuals wearing gloves and goggles entering with cases. Inside those cases, evidence disposal kits. But it wasn't just physical, it was legal. Denzel revealed he once received what he thought was a standard appearance waiver after a charity event hosted by Diddy in 2011. But in court, he unfolded a copy of that same document, a non-disclosure agreement disguised as an RSVP form. Hidden in the fine print were clauses forbidding not only speech or testimony, but even feelings of discomfort. Any expression of emotional unease could be interpreted as defamation, Denzel said. Imagine signing that without knowing it. The gallery murmured. Then came the hammer. The prosecution introduced what they called the Oro 3 file. No one had seen it publicly. It was mentioned only in whispers, referenced in an email Denzel had once received from a studio executive in 2018. If the press ever gets their hands on the Oro 3 file, we all go down with him. Stay clear. Denzel deleted the message, but not the memory. The Oro 3 file, it turned out, was a hard drive, not found in a server, not uploaded to the cloud, but hidden analog physical. It was seized during a raid on a secondary property registered under a Como's shell company. The drive was old, scratched, marked only with a year. Inside, authorities found what they later described as unlawful surveillance and behavioral recordings, hidden cameras, secret footage, people who had no idea they were being filmed, many of them famous, but more disturbing, some were not. Among the data was a folder labeled Tier Z Guests. It contained hours of video files recorded in dressing rooms, green rooms, and secluded parts of Diddy's estates. Guests were seen intoxicated, disoriented, or being manipulated into private chambers. You could see the fear in their eyes, one federal investigator said. They weren't partying, they were trapped. And then came the worst discovery. The footage was being edited. This wasn't just a collection, it was a production. Transitions, watermarks, even intro reels with musical scores. Diddy had allegedly commissioned private editors to cut together highlight reels of these events for what purpose no one could yet confirm. But the implication was clear. This was surveillance turned entertainment, a digital weapon to shame, blackmail, or control. And when the defense argued that this could have been a rogue employee, the prosecution countered by showing internal emails from Diddy himself. One message read, "Keep the heat files off the grid. Redline the miners. Everything else, keep backup. Everything else, backup." It was no longer possible to call this a misunderstanding. This was premeditated. The gallery sat numb as more evidence rolled in. A burned envelope recovered from a trash site in the California desert. Charred but partially legible, it read, Night Flight, 0G Invite, Crimson Tier Only. Below it, a lyric scribbled in handwriting later matched to Diddy's own, No sins in orbit, just silence. And then one last revelation before recess. Denzel had saved one name for the end, not of a victim, not of a conspirator, but of someone who tried to stop it all. A studio assistant, early 20s, worked briefly with one of Diddy's companies in 2019. She saw something, a folder labeled Airlocks on a shared server. Inside diagrams for the Heaven Lounge capsule communications between Diddy and private aerospace vendors, guest lists marked with TTL to the launch. She flagged it to her supervisor. She was fired a week later. 3 months later, she vanished. The case was filed as a voluntary disappearance. The assistant's parents insisted she was simply overwhelmed, but she left behind her laptop. On it, a single unsent email saved in drafts. They're planning something big. He says he wants to take the sins with him into the stars. I think I found the list. I think I'm on it. The courtroom gasped, and just like that, the break was called. But the silence lingered, because in the next part of this trial, the witnesses weren't just industry names or celebrities. They were people who never chose to be part of this, who had vanished without sound, who had tried to speak, but whose words were erased. Until now. The courtroom reconvened with an eerie stillness. No more celebrity entrances. No more cinematic reveals. What came next would come not from the spotlight, but from the shadows, people who had been behind the scenes off camera, unnamed, but essential to the truth. The prosecution called them the unseen witnesses. Their testimonies didn't come with fanfare, but each one peeled back another layer of Diddy's machine, and it was more intricate, more terrifying than anyone had imagined. The first to take the stand was a logistics coordinator, known only as witness of voice disguised face obscured. She had worked briefly with Pulse Event Systems, a now-dissolved company linked to both Mums Global and several third-party fan engagement platforms. Her role sift through social media, data cross-reference VIP contest entries, and tag premium prospects. I thought I was working for a marketing firm, she began. We were told these were exclusive fan experiences meant to enhance loyalty. But the databases told a different story. Each winner was tagged not by enthusiasm or contest metrics, but by physical traits, behavioral patterns, and digital footprints. The language used in internal memos was chilling aesthetic alignment, stage-compliant profile, low parental interference. The court leaned in, and when I asked what low parental interference meant, witness A added, my supervisor said, it means she won't be missed for a weekend. Silence fell again. The prosecution showed the jury one of the filtered databases. Each fan was assigned a color code: green for general meet and greets, yellow for photogenic leads, and red for crimson tier. Red wasn't about luck, it was about selection. The next witness was a former driver, witness B, hired through a private contractor linked to Pulse. He didn't know what he was transporting at first. Pickups were scheduled via burner numbers. The riders wore red wristbands, no IDs required. I thought it was a rideshare gig, he said. But then one time I picked up a girl in Tampa. She was crying, said she didn't think she'd win, said her mom didn't know she was going. He tried to follow up after the drop-off point, a gated property outside Miami, but the contact number was dead. That ride stayed with him. He kept the dash cam footage and later gave it to the FBI. They showed a still in court, a teenage girl waving at the camera, red wristband glowing in the car's interior lights, time-stamped just 40 minutes before she vanished. The mother took the stand next. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply handed the court a sealed envelope. Inside was a printout of her daughter's final Instagram story. It showed fireworks at a stadium Taylor Swift's Era tour. The caption read, "Best day of my life." But she never made it home. And then came the surprise. A forensic linguist. Not a usual courtroom role, but necessary this time. He had been hired to decode the cryptic messaging used across fan pages, VIP invites, and internal emails. His report revealed that Pulse Events had developed a coded lexicon designed to obscure trafficking terms as event management language. For example, push night 2, ow, schedule for extraction, no sync to merch list, bypass official rosters. Crimson lock, final selection, confirmed. But the most disturbing term, pass-through model, used in reference to Tier 1 talent. It described the covert usage of high-profile celebrity infrastructure, venues tours, press events as literal shields for darker activities. Taylor Swift didn't know, the analyst clarified, but her tour was exploited. Ariana Grande's event was used the same way. Diddy didn't need consent, he needed scale, and that's what they provided, then footage. A sealed security video from a hotel during a fragrance launch weekend. 2 girls in red wristbands entering through a freight elevator. They never checked into the public event. Inside source records later revealed they were listed as private facilitators, language never explained by event organizers. One of those girls prosecutors revealed matched a name later found in Diddy's re-entry folder recovered from the capsule mock-up after his arrest. The term re-entry wasn't about Earth. It was about reassigning Crimson targets across multiple events. They weren't guests. They were assets. The gallery was stunned. Even Diddy's attorney, stone-faced until now, looked shaken. Then came a moment no one expected. A live witness, not obscured, not anonymous, a former talent agent, mid-40s, composed. He admitted to having once helped recruit young women for what he believed were modeling auditions under a Combs-affiliated brand. The girls were flown out, offered contracts, but never heard from again. He wept as he spoke. One of them was my niece. I didn't know. I thought I was helping her break into the industry. She disappeared in 2021. Her name appeared on the Crimson 10 shortlist. And then, as if the court hadn't absorbed enough, a final witness took the stand. A teenage boy, now 19, identified only as Jordan. He had once worked as an assistant to Diddy's stylist, briefly hired for an international tour in 2022. He said he saw a binder in Diddy's dressing room. It was labeled Escape Plan, March 2025. Inside were diagrams, lists, photos of the capsule, printed emails, and one hand-scrawled page, no gravity, no guilt, no law, only loyalty. Jordan said he was told never to mention it. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, he said, especially when I saw my cousin's photo on one of the lists. She had gone missing the year before. They called it a runaway. She was 17. The courtroom didn't move, not even to breathe. And just before recess, the prosecutor read the final sentence of the binder aloud. If you control the launch, you control the silence. They had tried to bury it, but the voices were back. And in the next session, the final witnesses would be the ones who had once enabled the silence, now forced to confront the noise they created. The court reconvened with a heavy chill in the air. The previous testimonies had dismantled the myth of Diddy's empire. But what came next wasn't about victims or witnesses. It was about enablers, the ones who made it possible, who looked the other way, inked the deals, silenced the noise. This final chapter wouldn't be about what happened. It would be about who let it happen. The first to take the stand was a former publicist referred to only as Ms. L. She had worked for Combs Entertainment for over 7 years, specializing in damage control and media narrative steering. Her voice was steady, her words ice cold. We didn't spin stories, she said. We buried them. We had a playbook. She described a document called the fire sheet handed to every senior PR operative working under Diddy's umbrella. The document contained templates for online statements, pre-signed NDAs, and pre-drafted excuses for emergencies, miscommunication, fatigue, fake account stalker fan. Every possible accusation had a counter-narrative. Every victim had a discredit strategy. And worse, every leak had a cleanup cost. We had budget line items for settlements labeled event spillover. It was expected, a cost of doing business. When asked if she ever questioned the ethics, she didn't flinch. I did. Once. After a girl showed up to a press event in LA, barely 18. She didn't belong there, looked terrified, said she came for a modeling gig. I tried to speak with her in the restroom. She was gone before the next panel started. And her name, it was on a red tag. That tag appeared later in Pulse's archive under C10 priority. Then came the executives. An anonymous COO from a music distribution company tied to Diddy's tour infrastructure testified remotely. He confirmed his firm had greenlit back-end routing of promotional engagements without verifying the third-party partners. We thought it was just influencer outreach, he said. Turns out it was a smokescreen. When asked why they didn't conduct background checks, he replied, "We were told not to. The funding came fast, direct, and with hush clauses." Next up, a legal consultant from a major Hollywood firm. He wasn't on Diddy's payroll directly, but his team had helped structure global entertainment agreements that included obscure clauses labeled zone protections. These clauses essentially guaranteed that private events held on international waters or undisclosed airspace were exempt from U.S. jurisdiction. You're saying the prosecutor clarified that you legally constructed loopholes for immunity. The consultant didn't blink. That's what we were hired to do. And then, one final file. No witness this time. Just an audio log recovered from a wiped device seized at the Suriname launch site. In it, Diddy's voice echoed across the courtroom. Static. Then laughter. Then, this, "You think they can touch me out there. You think law reaches orbit. Let them chase ghosts. I'm going where legends go, where silence has gravity." The courtroom froze. It wasn't madness. It was intent. Calculated, funded, enabled. The judge allowed closing remarks. The prosecutor stood slowly. No theatrics, no notes. "This wasn't a fall from grace," he began. "It was a construction of hubris. A man who believed he could elevate above justice by escaping Earth itself. A man who turned music into manipulation, fame into fog, and fans into prey. He paused, and he would have made it if not for one man. He turned toward the empty witness box where Denzel Washington had testified just days earlier. Truth needs a vessel, and when everyone else stayed quiet, he didn't. And then, the gavel came down. In a single moment, it ended. Diddy, whose face had remained unreadable, finally showed emotion. He whispered something inaudible. Some say it was a curse. Others say it was regret. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all major counts, including conspiracy trafficking, attempted international evasion, and obstruction of justice. But the real victory wasn't in the sentence. It was in the reckoning. The next day, headlines didn't read Mogul Falls. They read Machine Broken. And amid the noise, one voice stood above, the rest calm, steady, firm. Denzel Washington's legacy wasn't just as an actor. It was as the man who testified when it mattered. Because in a courtroom full of silence, one truth echoed louder than the rest. You can run from cameras, you can flee from charges, but you can't escape gravity forever. And justice. Sometimes it lands like a meteor,